My father-in-law called me a gold digger in front of everyone. That's what my son told me the night I found him sitting alone at a bus stop, well past 11, in a suit that didn't belong on the streets. That was the moment I realized something inside me, something I'd kept buried for decades, had just snapped. I am his mother. And mothers know. I've been called many things in my life: poor, widow, black, invisible. But never had someone come for my child like that. Never had anyone looked at my son, my boy who worked through college, who fixed my roof with his own 2 hands, who gave more than he ever asked for and dared to strip him of his dignity in public. My name is Evelyn Johnson. I'm 63 years old, a retired nurse, a widow. I raised my only child in a small Georgia house where the walls were thin but the rules were solid. You worked hard. You told the truth. You never let anyone tell you you were less than human. And yet there he was. Jared sat on that bench like he was trying to disappear into the night. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie loosened, one shoe scuffed as if he'd dragged it along the pavement without noticing. When I touched his shoulder, he flinched, actually flinched like he was expecting another blow. "Mom," he whispered, and then he broke. Not polite tears. Not the kind men try to hide. Jared cried the way little boys cry when they've finally held it in too long. His chest heaved. His breath came out in broken gasps. He bent forward, burying his face in his hands, sobbing so hard his whole body shook. "I'm useless," he choked. "I'm nothing. I couldn't protect myself. I couldn't protect you. I couldn't even protect my own name." My heart shattered. I dropped my purse and knelt in front of him, right there on the sidewalk, traffic humming past like the world hadn't just ended. "No," I said, grabbing his wrists. "Don't say that. Don't you ever say that." Quote, 18A. But he pulled his hands away and started clawing at his own arms, his nails scraping red lines into his skin like he was trying to punish himself from the outside in. "I should have been better," he cried. "If I'd made more money, if I'd been stronger," he wouldn't have said it. He wouldn't have touched me. Touched. That word made my blood run cold. I wrapped my arms around him, tight, desperate to stop his hands, to hold him together before he fell apart completely. He thrashed once, panicked, and his elbow caught me hard in the side. I felt a sharp sting, then warmth. Later I'd see the thin line of blood seeping through my blouse, but in that moment I didn't care. If he needed to break skin to stay alive, let it be mine. "It's my fault," he sobbed into my shoulder. "All of it is my fault." I held him until his shaking slowed, until his breathing evened out enough for him to speak. We sat in my car for a long time after that, the engine running, the heater blasting, the smell of old leather and peppermint tea bags filling the air. That's when he told me everything. The engagement party, the chandeliers, the clinking glasses, Ronald Ashford standing at the center of the room like a king holding court, how he'd smiled while he spoke, how people laughed because they were supposed to, how Jared had stood there, frozen, while his future father-in-law called him a gold digger, dressed up as a joke. And then later, Jared said quietly, staring straight ahead, he pulled me aside. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. He told me men like me should know our place, that marrying his daughter didn't make me equal. He shoved me just enough so no one would notice and said if I caused trouble, he'd make sure I never worked in this city again. End quote. I felt something tear open inside my chest. Jared lifted his sleeve then, just slightly. Yellowing bruises bloomed along his forearm, already fading, already hidden. Evidence of a moment meant to be erased. "I didn't fight back," he whispered. "I just stood there, like a coward." I wanted to scream. At Ronald, at the world, at myself. Because in that moment, a thought I had avoided for years rose up and stabbed me clean through. I didn't give my son enough. I didn't give him armor strong enough to face men like that. I thought of every night shift I worked. Every apology for not affording better schools, better connections, better protection. I thought love and values would be enough. I was wrong. "I'm sorry," I said, the words ripping out of me before I could stop them. "I should have done more. I should have given you a better life, better people around you. You deserved more than this." Jared turned to me then, eyes red, voice hoarse. "No, Mom, don't. You gave me everything you had. But mothers know when the world demands more than love." I drove him home that night, made tea, reheated meatloaf he didn't eat, Watched him sit at my kitchen table like a man twice his age, defeated and ashamed. When he told me he'd lost his job too, when he said Ronald had made a few calls, something inside me settled. A cold, steady calm. This wasn't just cruelty. This was calculated. And men like Ronald Ashford make one mistake every time. They assume women like me are harmless. They assume widows forget. They assume the past stays buried. Upstairs, in a drawer I hadn't opened in years, was a notebook my late husband left behind. Names, dates, accounts. Quiet power built slowly, carefully, invisibly. As I watched my son sleep on the couch that night, exhausted from crying, bruised in body and soul, I made myself a promise. No one humiliates my child and walks away clean. This wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity. And this time, I would not fail him. If this story moved you, tap like and tell me where you're watching from. Someone nearby might be listening too. By the next morning, the bleeding had dried beneath my blouse. The cut from Jared's elbow wasn't deep, but it was raw in all the ways that matter. I didn't bandage it. I wanted to feel it. Sometimes pain is the only way to stay awake. Jared was still sleeping on the couch, curled in on himself like a boy. I watched him for a few minutes, remembering the nights I used to rub his back when he had night terrors. He used to talk in his sleep about dinosaurs, about building rockets, about fixing the world. Now, even in rest, he didn't speak at all. I poured a cup of coffee, black and bitter, and stood at the kitchen window. The air outside was sharp, leaves skipping across the pavement like restless ghosts. Autumn in Macon always had a way of reminding you what was dying. Ronald Ashford. I said his name in my mind, the way a preacher says a curse he isn't allowed to speak. I'd only met him twice, both times under that sheen of wealth that makes people think they're untouchable. White hair, black suit, $1,000 watch. He smiled like someone who never had to explain himself. He didn't speak to me directly at the engagement dinner, just looked me over like I was a seat cushion he'd inherited, something worn but familiar, not worth commenting on. I never liked Melanie either. Not because she was rude, but because she wasn't anything at all. Polite, in that distant way. Pretty the way catalogs are pretty generic, polished, and designed to be replaced with the next model. But she made Jared happy, or so I thought. And I stayed quiet because I wanted him to be chosen, for once. I never realized he'd been tolerated, not chosen. I sipped the coffee and walked back to the living room. Jared stirred, eyes fluttering open, confusion slipping into shame as he remembered where he was. "Morning," I said gently. "Sorry," he muttered, sitting up. "I didn't mean to." "You're home," I interrupted. "You don't apologize for that." He nodded, rubbed his face. I placed a plate of toast and eggs in front of him. He stared at it like he wasn't sure if he deserved to eat. "I need to go get my things," he said quietly. "From her place, if they haven't thrown it out. It's a private inquiry. I'll come with you." He looked at me, startled. "You don't have to." "I know," I said, "but I will." We drove across town to a neighborhood that had private security and lawns manicured within an inch of their lives. The Ashfords' home was all glass and white stone, the kind of place that looked like it didn't want to be lived in, only admired. Jared buzzed at the gate. A guard answered. After a few minutes, a housekeeper brought out 2 boxes and left them on the steps. No one else came to the door. "They didn't even let me in," he whispered, voice hollow. I got out of the car and walked up to the gate, staring into the camera. "This is Evelyn Johnson," I said clearly, "and this is the last time you'll put your hands on my son's life without consequence." No one responded, but I know they heard me. We drove back in silence. At a stoplight, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. Jared glanced at it. "What's that?" "Your father's legacy." He looked confused. I didn't explain. Not yet. Back home, I watched him open the boxes. Most of his clothes were there, but his laptop was missing. Some books, too. A framed photo of us at his college graduation had been smashed, only the cracked glass remained. "Tell me about the company," I said. He looked up. "Ronald's company. Who works there? What do they do?" "Why?" he asked. "Because I need to know what kind of man thinks he can erase you." At 18, he hesitated. Then slowly, he began to talk. Ronald Ashford ran a real estate investment group, Ashford and Miles. They specialized in flipping distressed neighborhoods into upscale properties. Jared had worked there for almost 3 years in development planning. He'd started out with enthusiasm, pitching ideas for affordable housing, community grants, long-term revitalization, but none of those projects ever moved forward. Instead, Ronald focused on high-profit ventures, building luxury units in gentrified areas, evicting low-income tenants, buying up public land through backdoor deals. Jared had grown uneasy. He'd even raised questions once in a board meeting. The next week, he was demoted to paperwork and assigned menial tasks. He didn't want my ideas, Jared said bitterly. He wanted my silence. I took a breath. It was all falling into place. I want everything you have, I said. Emails, notes, contracts, even if you don't think it matters. Mom, what are you planning? I looked at him, and my voice was quiet but steady. I'm planning to finish what your father started, and I'm not asking for permission. That night, while Jared slept again on the couch, I opened the notebook. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, property deeds, investor names, tax records. Henry had been watching Ashford for years. He used to work in city planning, and he'd suspected something crooked even then. He never lived to prove it. But I would, because when a man tears down your child in public, that's not just an insult. It's a declaration of war. I don't believe in fairy tales. Never did. Not even when I was a little girl reading worn-out library books in the corner of the porch, using a flashlight after Mama turned off the lights to save electricity. I've seen what the world does to dreamers. It feeds them sugar, then takes their teeth. But my son? Jared believed. He believed in hard work, in second chances, in showing up early and staying late. He believed in love, and when Melanie Ashford smiled at him across that overpriced gallery opening 3 years ago, he believed in her too. I didn't attend the engagement party, not because I wasn't invited. I was, reluctantly, but because I knew better than to show up where I wasn't truly welcome. Jared insisted I come, said it would mean a lot. But I knew that kind of party. I knew that kind of family. It wasn't a celebration. It was a performance. So I stayed home, baked a sweet potato pie, and kept my phone nearby just in case. He told me everything the next day, every excruciating detail. And I remember standing in the kitchen, holding a dish rag soaked through with cold water, wishing it was enough to wash the shame off him. It started with speeches. People raised glasses, praised Ronald Ashford's business acumen, Melanie's grace, the merging of two worlds, as if Jared hadn't earned his place with blood and overtime, as if his worth needed justification. Then Ronald stood up. He made a joke about marriage being a merger. He winked at the audience, laughed about Melanie inheriting the family empire, and then came the punchline. "Let's all toast to Jared," he said, smiling like a man used to hearing his own voice. A fine young man with ambition, and a shining example that love truly conquers all, even bank accounts. Laughter, polite, rehearsed, echoing against chandeliers. Then, "You've really struck gold with our Melanie. Just make sure you're not digging too deep, son." More laughter. Applause. Jared, standing there with a champagne flute in his hand, and nowhere to put it down, nowhere to hide. "I froze," he told me. "I wanted to say something, but I couldn't move." I looked at Melanie. She just smiled like it was nothing, like I should laugh along too. He did laugh, just once. Because what else can you do when the man who owns the room dares you to speak? Then Ronald waved to the security staff, said something like, "Let's give our groom a little break." He looks overwhelmed. They let him out. Not roughly, not rudely, just firmly, like an inconvenience. "Mom," Jared whispered, sitting at my kitchen table, staring at his hands. "I've never felt so small." I placed my hand on top of his. He didn't pull away this time. "That wasn't your failure," I said. "That was theirs." He nodded once. Then his voice dropped lower. "There's more." My stomach tightened. After they escorted me out, one of Ronald's assistants followed, gave me a manila envelope. He reached into his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. Inside were copies of Jared's credit report, tax returns, and a non-disclosure agreement. He said if I signed it and stayed away quietly, they'd offer me a severance like I was being let go from a job I never asked for. The document was real, notarized. They'd prepared for this, planned it, anticipated his humiliation. They wanted me to disappear. Neatly. I wanted to burn the papers. I wanted to drive to that mansion and throw them in Ronald's face. Instead, I folded them and tucked them into the leather-bound notebook from Henry, because information is fuel, and I was going to burn their world to the ground with it. "They're dangerous, Mom," Jared said. "You shouldn't get involved." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I've been watching men like Ronald my whole life. They only seem powerful until you look them in the eyes. Then you see the fear, the emptiness, the need to control everything because deep down, they know they're nothing without it. Jared looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not just as his mother, but as someone capable of things he never imagined. "I thought I could build a future with her," he said softly. "You still will," I replied. "But not with her. And not with anyone who doesn't stand beside you when you're being torn down." That night, after he'd gone to bed, I stared at the NDA again. The audacity of it. The cruelty wrapped in legal terms. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the fireplace. The house was quiet, but my mind was alive with plans, timelines, possibilities. Henry had taught me to read between the lines, to track patterns, to follow the money. Now it was my turn. They left my son at the altar table. They thought it was the end of the story, but it was just the start of mine. Jared didn't come out of his room the next morning. Not until almost noon, when the smell of bacon and biscuits finally convinced him the world hadn't completely turned to ash. I heard the door creak, slow footsteps down the hallway, then the low scratch of the kitchen chair pulling out. He didn't say good morning, just sat, still wearing yesterday's clothes. His eyes were hollow, not tired, emptied. I placed the plate in front of him, slid the syrup jar closer. He didn't reach for it. "They took everything," he said, eyes on the wood grain in the table. "Even the things I didn't know I was giving." I sat across from him with my own plate, untouched. "They didn't take your name," I said quietly. He scoffed. "They turned it into a joke." "No, they tried. That's different." He looked up at me for the first time that morning, and there it was again, that helpless ache that no mother can fix with a Band-Aid or a bedtime story. His eyes, once so full of plans and questions and fire, were just empty. "I don't know who I am without her," he said. "Then it's time to find out," I answered. He didn't respond. Just picked up the fork and started pushing food around the plate like it offended him. We ate in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't fill a room but settles into its bones. Outside, the wind was playing with the mailbox again. I made a mental note to fix the latch. "Tell me about the job," I said. He blinked. "What job?" "The one you lost. Tell me what you were doing, what you saw, what you were working on." He leaned back, arms crossed. "Why?" "Because I want to understand exactly how deep Ronald's reach goes." He hesitated. Then finally, because trust is something that either dies or deepens in these moments, he began to speak. "I was in development," Jared said. "Mostly site research, budget projections, early stage planning. At first it felt like a dream. They let me sit in on big meetings, let me present. Ronald even shook my hand once and said, 'Sharp mind on this one.' I thought I'd finally made it. It was Reglet." He rubbed his forehead, eyes narrowing as if he could still see the room. "But after 6 months, they started shelving everything I proposed. Affordable housing plans? Shelved. Green space initiatives? Ignored. Every time I brought up community impact, Ronald would smile and say, 'That's adorable. But we're here to turn a profit, not save the world.'" I nodded. "And you kept pushing?" "At first, then I realized I was being sidelined. They reassigned me to monitor site inspections. Paper pushing. They wanted to keep me visible, but powerless." He stood and paced the room now, restless. "One day, I saw a contract come through for a lot near Vineville. Public land. But the purchase documents were private, through shell companies. I knew Vineville. That area had a waiting list for affordable housing. The fact that Ronald was buying it up in secret, it wasn't just unethical. It was criminal." "You said something?" "Of course I did," Jared muttered. "I flagged it in a report, quietly. Next thing I know, Melanie's distant. Ronald stops responding to my emails, and 2 weeks later I'm let go with no explanation." He turned to me, eyes flashing, now not empty, but burning again. And then the engagement party happened, like a final act in a play I didn't know I was cast in. I stood up and opened the drawer next to the fridge, pulled out Henry's old folder, the one labeled A&M Holdings, Active Watch. Jared frowned. You kept his files? Every one, I said. He opened it slowly. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, articles, tax reports, zoning decisions, some dating back more than a decade. Henry had been watching Ronald long before Jared ever met Melanie. He never told me he suspected him, Jared said. He didn't want to scare you off, I replied. He believed people should find their own truths. Jared sat down again, staring at the folder. So what now? We write an angry letter to the editor? File a complaint? He'll bury it with lawyers before it hits the first desk. We don't complain, I said. We investigate, we confirm, and when we have enough, we make sure he can't bury it. You sound like you've done this before, he said, a bit of that old smirk sneaking through. I looked him in the eye. I've survived. That's harder. That afternoon, we sat side by side at the kitchen table with the old files spread between us. Jared showed me how to look up property records online, how to trace shell companies, how to find the fingerprints people thought they'd wiped clean. He was teaching me, not just trusting me. And for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of something returning in his eyes. Focus, purpose, hope. Before bed, I printed out one particular deed. It linked a company called Eastlight Holdings, one of Ronald's shells, to a neighborhood he'd evicted last year. The same one where Jared once did community work during college. Tomorrow, I said, sliding the paper into a new folder, we visit a few addresses. Why? Jared asked. Because Ronald thinks he erased you, I replied. But he's about to find out we know how to write. We drove in silence for the first 10 minutes. The air in the car felt thick with everything we weren't saying, everything still raw and unhealed. Jared had the deed printout in his lap, fingers fidgeting with its edges like he was folding away old pain. He hadn't asked where we were going. He trusted me. Or maybe he just didn't have the energy to object. I called ahead, I finally said. Old neighbor of ours, Ruthie Mendez. She lives on Walnut Street now, right near the block Ronald bought through that shell company. She said things have changed a lot. Jared nodded slowly. Changed how? People pushed out. Rent tripled. She said the new landlord never showed up in person, just mailed notices. Half the block is empty now. He didn't respond, just stared out the window. Walnut Street used to be alive. I remembered pushing Jared in a stroller there when he was little. There were kids on bikes, women hanging laundry, men fixing cars with music playing too loud. Now, it felt quiet, not peaceful, hollow. We pulled up to a small brick house with a crooked mailbox and hand-painted numbers. Ruthie opened the door before we knocked. Evelyn, she cried, her arms opening wide. She was rounder than I remembered, with streaks of gray in her curls, but her eyes hadn't changed sharp and kind. She pulled me into a hug, then looked Jared over with concern. You look too grown and too tired, she said, cupping his face. Come on in, both of you. The inside of the house smelled like plantains and old wood. Jared sat quietly while Ruthie served sweet coffee and sat across from us. You said you wanted to ask about the block, she said. I nodded. You said folks were being pushed out. Tell us everything. Ruthie sighed and leaned back. It started last year. Notices came in the mail. First it was just a change in management, then new leases with higher rent. Real high. Half the folks couldn't afford it, so they left. And no one came in to talk to you? Jared asked. No one. Just letters. I went down to the city office once. They told me the property was owned by Eastlight Holdings, but no one answered their phone. It was like talking to a ghost. Did anyone fight it? I asked. A few, she said. Mr. Harris on the corner, he tried. Filed a complaint. Next thing he knew, his roof was suddenly unsafe, and the city condemned the house. He had to move in with his daughter in Alabama. Jared clenched his jaw. That's illegal. Only if someone proves it, Ruthie said with a shrug. We sat in silence a moment. I looked over at Jared. His fingers tapped the deed slowly, his eyes scanning the room like he was memorizing it. Do you have the letters? He asked. Ruthie nodded. I kept every one, in a drawer just in case. Could we see them? I asked. Course, she said, getting up. While she left the room, Jared leaned in closer to me. This is bigger than a business deal, Mom. He's using shell companies to gut communities. Quietly. I know, I said. That's why we're here. End quote. Ruthie returned with a folder of papers. Jared sifted through them carefully. The logos on the envelopes were all variations of the same name: Eastlight Holdings, Eastlight Property Group, Eastlight Urban Trust. It was the same monster wearing different masks. "These signatures," Jared whispered. "I've seen them. At work." "You think Ronald signed them?" I asked. "No, that's the thing. He never signs anything directly. He uses proxies, legal stand-ins. But this one," he tapped one of the letters. "This one's familiar. Her name's Emily Kearns. She was in HR, but she had access to corporate filings." He looked at me, a spark in his eyes. "If we can find her, talk to her, we might get something real." I nodded. "Then we'll find her." Ruthie gave Jared a soft smile. "You're doing good, baby. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you are." He tried to smile back. It didn't quite land, but I saw the corners of his mouth twitch. As we left, Ruthie slipped me a small envelope. "In case you need help," she whispered. Inside was a flash drive. "Copies of everything. Just don't say where you got it." We walked back to the car in silence. Jared got in first. He was quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This one had weight, purpose. As I started the engine, I glanced at him. "Still think you don't know who you are without her?" He looked out the window. "I think I'm finally starting to figure it out. It's Providence spotted sense of it. The down you didness Providence spotted sense of and winted." And as we drove back home, I thought, this is what resurrection looks like. Not with fanfare, not with miracles, but with truth dug out of the ground one document at a time. Finding Emily Kearns wasn't difficult. People leave digital footprints everywhere these days. LinkedIn updates, alumni newsletters, even old apartment listings. What was difficult was predicting what kind of person she would be when we found her. Would she be scared? Loyal to Ronald? Or just tired enough to want the truth out? We drove out to a modest apartment complex on the edge of the city. The kind of place where every building looks the same and the parking lot has more potholes than pavement. Emily had listed it as her address in a now-defunct professional directory, but I could tell Jared wasn't sure we'd get anything. "She left the company 6 months ago," he said, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "Rumor was Ronald gave her a severance package and a confidentiality clause." "I'm not here to out-rumor a man like him," I said calmly. "I'm here to out-truth him." Apartment 3B was on the second floor, tucked in a corner that barely saw sunlight. Jared knocked. A moment passed. Then another. Just as he was about to step back, the door cracked open. Emily peeked out. Late 30s, sharp eyes behind glasses, no makeup, hoodie zipped halfway up. She blinked at Jared. "Jared?" He nodded. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, looked over her shoulder like someone might be watching, then opened the door wider. 10 minutes, she said. That's it. The apartment was clean but sparse, like someone who'd packed up but never left. A single couch, a coffee table with old magazines, and a laptop on the floor. She motioned for us to sit. "You here to ask about Eastlight?" Jared nodded. "You signed off on relocation notices. On fake shell companies Ronald used to buy property illegally." However being awesomement, Emily sighed and rubbed her temples. "Look, I never wanted to do any of it, but you know how it works. You question things. You're out. They offered me a way out with money attached." "You took it," I said gently. "I did, because my mother was sick, and I needed to pay her medical bills." Her voice cracked for a moment. "I didn't think anyone would get hurt." "Not really. It was just paperwork." "But people did get hurt," Jared said, voice steady. "Myself included." "It's not of now." Emily looked at him, and something shifted in her face. Recognition, shame. "You were the one they used," she whispered. "Ronald bragged about it, called you a perfect distraction, said you were harmless enough to look good on paper but not smart enough to see the strings." Jared flinched. I felt heat rise in my chest. "And then?" I asked. Emily stood and walked to her laptop, opened a folder. I started saving things, emails, drafts. I knew I was going to leave, but I wanted to make sure I had something just in case. She clicked through, then turned the screen toward us. Dozens of files, emails between Ronald and board members, internal memos detailing evictions, under-the-table donations to city inspectors, spreadsheets mapping how neighborhoods were stripped of tenants and flipped for profit. "Why didn't you go public?" I asked. Because Ronald's people threatened to sue, she said flatly. They said they'd destroy me, ruin my credit, blacklist me from every firm. I'm not rich. I don't have a trust fund. I have a cat and medical debt, and one friend who still talks to me. She looked at Jared again. But I never forgot what they did to you, she added. You didn't deserve that. And if you're ready to do something with this, she tapped the screen, then so am I. We sat with her for another hour. Jared copied the files onto a drive. Emily scribbled down a list of names, people still inside the company who might quietly help, or at least not get in the way. As we left, I reached for her hand. Thank you, I said. She didn't smile. Just nodded. If you take him down, take him all the way down. Outside, Jared leaned against the car, breathing hard. You okay? I asked. He nodded slowly. That was the first time someone from that world actually told the truth. She won't be the last, I said. As we drove off, I saw something in the rearview mirror, Emily, standing at her window, watching us. She looked scared, but she didn't look small, and that was enough. Back home, we organized the files. Ruthie's documents, Henry's notebook, and now Emily's treasure trove of evidence. The picture was becoming clear. This wasn't just greed. This was a coordinated theft of dignity, home by home, family by family. Jared looked at the pile of printed pages and whispered, We're gonna need help. Actually bounced to intentionant. Yes, I said, and I know just the man to ask. I hadn't spoken to Reggie Sanders in over 12 years. Back then, he was the crime beat reporter at the Macon Gazette, a local paper that was always 2 staff cuts away from extinction. We met when he covered a wrongful death suit at the hospital. I worked at an elderly black patient, misdiagnosed and left to suffer because no one believed her pain was real. Reggie wrote the piece like it was fire in his veins. It didn't save the woman, but it sure shook the foundation. I never forgot him, and judging by the tone of his voice when I called, he hadn't forgotten me either. Evelyn Johnson, he said. I figured you either won the lottery or had a story that would piss somebody off. I smiled. What if I told you it's both? He laughed, that same rasp-tinged chuckle I remembered. Where you want to meet? We chose a diner off College Street, one that still served grits in cast iron and called you sugar, no matter your age. I got there early. Jared was nervous about bringing anyone into the fold, but he also knew we couldn't do this alone. Reggie wasn't just any reporter. He was the kind who still believed journalism could change things. He walked in wearing his usual uniform, worn blazer, frayed notebook, and eyes that had seen too much and written even more. You look good, he said as he sat down. You look tired, I replied. Always. We ordered coffee. When it came, I slid the manila folder across the table. Reggie opened it slowly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the documents. Deed transfers, eviction patterns, shell company registries, and most importantly, Emily's memos. He didn't speak for 5 minutes, just flipped pages, sipped coffee, and read. When he finally looked up, his voice was quiet. Do you know what this is? Yes, I said. This is dynamite. Then light the fuse. He leaned back, rubbed his chin. It's not that simple. Ashford's got lawyers, PR teams, friends in city council. If I print this wrong, they'll bury the story and maybe me too. You don't have to go public yet, I said. Just help us confirm what we have. Use your contacts. Find out who's still pulling the strings. And then what? Then we go bigger. Reggie looked over at Jared. You ready for this? This gets dirty. Jared hesitated for a moment. Then he nodded. I've been silent too long. Reggie tapped the folder. All right, I'll do some digging, but I want more than documents. I want people, victims, names, faces. You'll get them, I said. I promise. We left the diner with a handshake and a plan. Reggie would start soft internal verification, quiet interviews, subtle calls to City Hall. In the meantime, Jared and I would begin reaching out to those displaced by Eastlight Holdings, not just Ruthie, but all the others who never got a voice. That night, we sat at the dining room table with a map of Macon spread across the surface. Jared marked addresses with red pins based on data Emily had provided. Each pin represented a family, a story, a life disrupted for someone else's profit. It's a graveyard, Jared whispered. No, I said, placing another pin. It's a battleground. I have Dinda 70'd. We worked until midnight. Around 1 a.m., Reggie called. Just got confirmation, he said. One of the shell companies used to transfer Vineville Properties Eastlight Urban Trust was tied to a PAC that donated heavily to Mayor Carver's last campaign. I sat up. So it goes deeper. Way deeper, Reggie replied. This isn't just about Ronald. It's a network, and we're going to need to bring sunlight to every corner of it. He paused. Evelyn, you sure you want to do this? I looked at Jared, asleep on the couch, a legal pad on his chest. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We started with names. Old leases, voter rolls, community center rosters, anywhere people once belonged before they were made invisible. Jared was meticulous, organizing spreadsheets while I made calls. Some numbers had been disconnected. Others picked up, only to hang up the moment I said Eastlight. End quote. Fear lingers, even after the moving trucks are gone. But we found them. One by one. The Bennetts, who'd lived on Mayfield Avenue for 22 years before a notice arrived saying the property was being re-evaluated for code compliance. They had 2 weeks to leave. Mrs. Washington, 68, who'd raised 4 grandchildren in a duplex on Plum Street, evicted over a late fee she swore she never missed. Miguel Alvarez, a mechanic who watched half his block vanish and now lived above the garage where he worked, just to stay close to what used to be home. They told us their stories in whispers and anger and silence. Jared took notes. I brought coffee, cookies, hugs. We didn't promise them justice, just that someone, finally, was listening. Each story matched the pattern. Sudden property management changes, arbitrary fee increases, unlivable repairs, and faceless corporations that owned everything but answered to no one. Back at home, Jared built a timeline. On one side of the corkboard were photos, families, houses, eviction letters. On the other were connections, shell companies, campaign donors, Ronald Ashford's smiling face in press releases. And in the center, the question I had written in red marker. How many lives did it cost to build his empire? Reggie visited 3 days later. He stood in our kitchen, eyes scanning the board like a detective at a crime scene. Good work, he muttered. Scary work. He dropped a folder on the table. Here's what I've got. Ronald's brother-in-law sits on the city's zoning committee. His niece is married to the deputy mayor. And he's got a nonprofit listed as a donor to the same housing initiative he helped defund 2 years ago. Conflict of interest? Jared asked. Try conspiracy, Reggie said. But proving it, that's another mountain. He looked at us seriously. You need a face, a moment, one voice they can't ignore. I've got one, I said. Mine, Reggie raised an eyebrow. I'll talk, on the record, but not as a source, as a mother whose son was humiliated and used as a cover-up, a mother who saw a community gutted. People don't ignore that kind of pain, not when you make it personal. You sure? He asked. This puts you in the crosshairs. I've been in the crosshairs since the day Ronald called my son a gold digger. Reggie smiled, but it wasn't joyful. It was respect. Then let's make them listen. That evening, we filmed it in our living room. Just me, Jared behind the camera, and a single light. I spoke slowly, clearly. No tears. Just truth. I raised my son to believe in fairness, I began. He believed in people. And that belief got used against him. The man who promised to welcome him into a family instead weaponized him. As distraction, as camouflage, to mask a far greater injustice, the silent destruction of entire communities. I held up the eviction letters. These are not numbers, these are lives. I looked into the lens like I was staring down every rich man who ever thought pain was beneath him. And I'm not afraid of you. We uploaded the video anonymously at first. Reggie helped send it to a few key journalists, activists, and housing coalitions. Within 24 hours, it was everywhere. Local news picked it up. Social media lit up. Reggie's article dropped the next day, The Cost of Silence, Inside Macon's Hidden Housing Crisis. Comments flooded in, emails, messages of support, and a few threats. Ronald's PR team released a statement calling the claims unfounded and malicious. Melanie deleted her social media accounts. The city council issued a brief acknowledgement, but no promises. But it didn't matter. We'd cracked the glass. And people were finally looking inside. 3 days after the video went viral, a black SUV parked outside my house. It didn't move, didn't honk, just sat there for hours with its windows tinted so dark I couldn't even see a silhouette inside. Jared noticed it first. He was pouring coffee, looking out through the blinds like he'd been doing since the story broke. "Mom," he said, "that car's been there since 6 this morning." I walked over, glanced out. My heart didn't race at my age. You stop letting fear set the rules. But I did feel the old pressure in my chest, like a clock winding tight. "They're watching," Jared whispered. "Of course they are," I replied. I didn't call the police. What was I going to say? That someone was sitting legally on a public street making me uncomfortable? Ronald Ashford didn't send thugs. He sent signals, reminders. This was the first one. The second came that afternoon. A knock on the door. Calm, rhythmic. I opened it to find a man in a suit, mid-40s, well-groomed, holding a briefcase. No smile, no badge, just stillness. "Mrs. Johnson?" he asked. "I am. I represent Ashford Group Holdings. I'd like to speak with you." Number said. Jared moved beside me. "We're not interested," he said. The man didn't flinch. "It's about a potential resolution, a financial settlement, off the record." I stared at him. "How much?" He blinked, caught off guard. "How much?" I repeated. "Let's skip the script." He opened the briefcase and pulled out a sleek folder. Inside numbers, 6 figures. More if we agreed to take down the video, retract the story, and sign a confidentiality agreement. "Your family could move somewhere new," he said gently. "Start fresh. This doesn't have to define you." I stepped forward until we were nearly face to face. "This isn't about us," I said. "It's about everyone Ronald buried so his shoes never touched the mud." He held out a pen. Jared took it from his hand and snapped it in half. The man sighed. "You understand this may escalate." I smiled. "It already has." We closed the door. That night, someone cut the power to our house. Just for an hour. Just long enough to rattle the windows, plunge us into silence, and remind us that shadows move fastest when the lights go out. But Jared didn't panic. He lit candles, grabbed his laptop, and kept working. I made tea on the gas stove. We sat together at the kitchen table like it was any other night, because fear only works if you give it a seat. Reggie called the next morning. "They're spooked," he said. "City council's scrambling. Ronald's lawyers are sending cease and desist letters to everyone who even liked your video. And the mayor? Silent." "Then we push harder," I said. He paused. "I need you to know what's coming. They might dig into your past, try to discredit you, make you look bitter, unstable, emotional." "I am emotional," I cut in. "You'd better believe that," Reggie chuckled. "Then let's give them more to fear." And quote, "Our 79 ingrate maybe for palate." And quote, "Our 79. That afternoon he published a follow-up, The Woman Behind the Video, Evelyn Johnson's Fight for Justice. It was part profile, part call to action. He framed me not as a victim, but as a force, a mother who refused to forget, a woman who made quiet rooms tremble. The comments poured in. Emails from displaced families, retired city workers, even a junior developer who once interned at Ashford Holdings and saw fake invoices get rubber-stamped. The tide was turning, but the tide is dangerous too, because the third message came in the form of fire. At 2:47 a.m., someone set fire to our mailbox. Flames leapt up the wooden post and singed the bushes before a neighbor hosed it down. It didn't spread far. No one was hurt. But the smell lingered. Jared stared at the ashes. His voice was ice. "They're scared." "They should be," I said. We reported it. The fire department came, filled out a report, said all the right things, but no one asked about cameras. No one took fingerprints. It was a warning, plain and simple, and everyone knew it. Still, we didn't stop. Instead, Jared filed a public complaint with the zoning board. We sent redacted files to a housing rights attorney Reggie recommended. And we started preparing for a town hall meeting where Ronald's latest community project was set to be unveiled. That night, as we sat in the darkened living room, candlelight flickering across Jared's tired face, he looked at me and asked the quietest question yet. "Do you think we'll win?" I reached out and took his hand. "I think we already are." The flyer arrived in the mail 2 days after the fire, sleek, glossy, thick like it cost more than some families' weekly groceries. A new Macon. Vision 2030, it read in blue serif font, above a photo of Ronald Ashford shaking hands with the mayor. Below that, it promised an evening of transparency, opportunity, and revitalization. The irony nearly choked me. "They're staging a spectacle," Jared said, tossing the flyer onto the table. "They'll stand on a stage, throw around buzzwords, show a PowerPoint with fake smiles and bar graphs." I nodded. "Then we show up too." The event was held at the Macon Civic Auditorium, same building where I graduated nursing school 40 years ago. Funny how places hold both pride and bitterness like layers of old paint. Jared wore his one good jacket. I wore a brooch Henry gave me for our 10th anniversary, a tiny gold dove. Peace, yes, but also defiance. We arrived early. The lobby buzzed with staffers in matching shirts, all smiles and clipboards. Free refreshments, brochures, a giant banner that read, "Building Together." They didn't notice us. Or maybe they did but didn't see us. Inside, the auditorium was half full and growing. City council members occupied the first few rows. Ronald's team flanked the stage. Cameras were being set up. Jared and I took our seats near the middle, close enough to be heard, far enough not to be silenced. The event opened with music, some pre-recorded orchestral piece to make it all feel noble. Then the mayor took the podium, voice polished and measured. He thanked Ronald for his leadership, praised his visionary housing initiative, and invited him to the stage. Ronald stepped forward in a tailored suit, beaming like a man who'd never been questioned in his life. He spoke of urban revitalization, of inclusive development, of reinvesting in forgotten neighborhoods. He used words like empower, synergy, and collaboration. I could feel Jared shaking beside me. When Ronald began taking pre-screened questions from index cards, I stood. No mic, no permission, just a mother's voice. "Mr. Ashford," I called out, clear and loud, "how many homes did you destroy to fund this revitalization?" The room went quiet like a vacuum. Ronald paused, eyes scanning the crowd, landing on me. Recognition flickered, and then calculation. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said smoothly. "This segment is for registered questions." "How many?" I repeated. "Because I've got the names, the leases, the eviction notices with your proxy's signature." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jared stood beside me now. "You used my family as camouflage," he said. "You paraded me like a success story while gutting communities behind the curtain." Someone from the staff rushed toward us with a polite but urgent smile. "Please sit down." But others were standing now too. Ruthie, Miguel, Mrs. Washington, people who hadn't planned to speak but recognized a moment when it came. One by one, they added their voices. "My rent tripled in 3 months." "You condemned my house over a broken porch light." "And agree." "My son had to drop out of school when we were evicted." The stage dissolved into murmurs, then outrage. A councilman tried to restore order. The mayor stammered something about staying on topic. Ronald stood motionless, smile faltering. Jared pulled out a flash drive and held it high. "This contains signed contracts, ghost company transactions, and testimonies from your own former staff. We've submitted it to state housing authorities and multiple press outlets. So if you're planning another lie, don't bother. The story's already out." Applause broke, not from everyone, but from enough. Enough to shift the mood, enough to make Ronald flinch. We left before security could escort us. Not because we were afraid, but because our work there was done. We didn't need to stay to watch the house of cards shake. Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. Jared exhaled, a full-body release. "That felt good," he said. "It wasn't for feeling good," I said. "It was for being heard." He nodded. "And being believed." That night, Reggie called. "I've never seen anything like that," he said. "You didn't just speak, you cracked the silence wide open. We're getting flooded with emails." And the mayor's office just issued a statement saying they'll review any new evidence presented. It's not a win yet, but it's not a cover-up anymore. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. No dreams, just quiet. 3 days after the town hall, a letter arrived by courier. No envelope, no return address. Just a thick ivory sheet folded precisely, the way men like Ronald fold lies into invitations. It was an offer. Buried in legal jargon and soft threats, the message was clear. Walk away, and everything goes back to quiet. a sizable donation to a community center in our name. A glowing editorial rebranding Jared's story as a misunderstood success. Even a new job, 6 figures, full benefits, conveniently located out of state. It was peace. Purchased. Jared stared at the letter in silence for a long time. "They're trying to erase it," he finally said. "No," I replied. "They're trying to rewrite it, put a bow on top and sell it back to the public as charity." That afternoon, Reggie called with an update. "The mayor's office wants a private sit-down. No cameras, just mutual stakeholders discussing forward pathways. You're invited." I had a Cladidbine. I didn't need to ask who sent the invitation. I already knew. We debated whether to go. Jared was torn, furious, skeptical, but curious too. "If they're offering deals, they're scared," he said, "and scared men talk too much." So we went. The meeting was held in a downtown office building that smelled like old money and lemon polish. We were escorted to a conference room with long windows and short patience. Around the table sat the mayor, 2 aides, a lawyer from the city zoning department, and Ronald Ashford himself. He didn't smile this time. "Thank you for coming," the mayor began. "We believe in transparency and civic trust. There's been a lot of noise recently, and we'd like to bring clarity and mutual resolution." I leaned forward. "Let me guess. No lawsuit, no press, and you clean up a few neighborhoods to make it look like progress." "Restitution," Ronald said finally. His voice was low, clipped. "For displaced residents, selective compensation. We'll even rename one of the parks after your husband if that's meaningful." I stared at him. "You think this is about branding?" Ronald's lawyer interjected. "Mrs. Johnson, with respect, you've made your point. The city is listening. We want to move forward constructively." I looked around the table, suits and titles. People used to close doors and closed mouths. So I opened mine. "I don't want a park. I don't want a check. I want records released, oversight committees installed, and public apologies to every family whose dignity you stole while sipping cocktails at fundraising galas." Silence. Jared added, "And I want an investigation, not just into Ronald's holdings, but into how this council let it happen." "You're asking for scorched earth," the mayor said tightly. "No," I said, standing. "We're asking for daylight." We left without shaking hands. Later that night, Reggie published the story of that meeting. He didn't need recordings. He had quotes, documents, and most importantly, momentum. The public's response was immediate and divided. Some hailed us as heroes, others called us troublemakers. But what no one could do anymore was ignore us. 2 days later, the State Housing Authority launched a preliminary review. A week after that, the City Council voted to suspend 2 officials tied to Eastlight Holdings. Ronald didn't speak to the press. He vanished behind locked gates and crisis managers. But it didn't matter. The truth was already walking free. That night, I sat with Jared on the porch. The wind carried the scent of grass and smoke and change. "I keep thinking," he said softly, "what if I had just walked away? That night, after the party." "You wouldn't be you," I said. He looked at me. "And you?" I smiled. "I'd still be your mother. But I'd be carrying silence instead of fire." Ender's Well. We watched the sun dip below the rooftops. This wasn't the end, but it was a turning. It was just after sunrise when I found the envelope. I had been cleaning out the attic, not for nostalgia but necessity, reporters were calling now, and I wanted to make sure nothing up there could be twisted or used against us. That's when I saw it. A faded manila envelope tucked behind a loose floorboard, sealed with yellowed tape, my name written on the front in Henry's familiar cursive. "Evelyn, for when you're ready to finish what we started." My hands shook. I sat down right there on the floor, the dust clinging to my jeans, and opened it. Inside, notes. Newspaper clippings, handwritten timelines, a USB drive. Henry had been investigating Ronald years ago. Quietly, patiently, even as his health declined, even as his memory began to stutter. He hadn't just been writing in that notebook of his, he'd been building a case. The files traced back to Ronald's earliest ventures. Land disputes. Bribes disguised as consulting fees. Predatory loans offered to black families in West Macon during the early 2000s. Properties flipped within months, profits hidden behind LLCs registered out of state. One name came up over and over: Nathan Griggs, a banker turned urban renewal consultant who'd vanished in 2012 right before a federal audit into municipal bonds. I raced downstairs. Jared was already at the table, scrolling through comments on Reggie's latest article. I slid the folder toward him. He opened it, eyes widening. Mom, this connects Ronald to half the development scandals from 20 years ago. Henry started this, I whispered, and we're going to finish it. We plugged in the USB, dozens of documents, scanned contracts, flagged checks, old voice memos Henry had recorded for himself. His voice came through the speakers soft, measured, sometimes trembling with fatigue, but always sharp. Ronald doesn't build, he erases, he said in one recording. He makes sure his name is on the plaque, but never the lawsuit. Favors flow one way, money flows the other. The secret is in who never shows up on paper. It wasn't just evidence, it was a roadmap. We shared it with Reggie immediately. He came over within the hour, breathless. You realize what this is, right? This isn't just about housing. This is federal, RICO level, if it connects across state lines. Jared nodded. And if we trace the money through Nathan Griggs, we prove Ronald's pattern of laundering profit through fake development projects. Reggie ran his hand through his hair. We need more. Someone who can verify these documents. Someone who was in the room. We thought about Emily, but she'd already risked enough. Then Jared said, What about Henry's old firm? I blinked. Carmichael and Lowe? He interned there before he retired. If they helped prepare any of these contracts, we made the call. Mr. Lowe himself answered. He remembered Henry, remembered the quiet old man who stayed late, asked questions, always curious but never pushy. When I explained what we'd found, there was a pause. I can't speak over the phone, he said, but I owe Henry. Meet me tomorrow. Bring the files. The next day, we met Mr. Lowe at his private office walls lined with law books, certificates, and dust-covered justice scales. He reviewed the papers silently, adjusting his glasses now and then. When he looked up, his eyes were glassy. He brought me some of this years ago, he said. I told him to let it go, that it was too big, too dangerous. I was wrong. He signed a letter of verification on firm letterhead, offered his legal assistance pro bono, and handed us something unexpected. A copy of a deposition Henry had requested just before his illness worsened. Nathan Griggs' deposition, never submitted. Griggs didn't disappear, Lowe said. He changed his name and moved west. But this is his voice, admitting Ronald coached him on how to structure the loans. Jared looked at me. This is it, Mom. The foundation, the whole skeleton. I closed my eyes for a moment. Heard Henry's voice again. For when you're ready to finish what we started. We were ready. Reggie called at dawn. Turn on the radio, he said. I did. Local NPR was in the middle of its 8 a.m. news segment when the anchor's voice dropped into that register they use when something serious is happening. An exclusive breaking story this morning. New evidence has surfaced, linking prominent developer Ronald Ashford to a 2-decade-long housing scheme involving fraudulent property acquisitions, political kickbacks, and unlawful evictions across the state of Georgia. Sources include verified documents from a former associate and legal confirmations from a retired senior partner of Carmichael and Lowe. Jared walked in, toothbrush in hand, eyes wide. They're running it, I whispered. It's out. Reggie didn't stop at radio. He had planned this release like a symphony, local TV, online platforms, a deep dive piece with embedded documents. He even posted the original deposition audio, letting Nathan Griggs' voice tell the story in his own words. I structured the deals at Ronald's direction. Griggs admitted in the recording. I used shell entities. I knew what we were doing would evict families, but Ronald said it was part of the urban evolution. Urban evolution. Like lives were weeds to be cleared. The public backlash was immediate and louder than before. Comment sections exploded, phone lines at City Hall jammed, civil rights groups demanded investigations. A march was organized for the weekend. Protest signs went up on lawns in neighborhoods Ronald had once stripped bare. By noon, Ronald's PR firm dropped him. By 3 p.m., the mayor's office announced a full internal audit. But none of that prepared me for what came next. An email from Melanie. Subject line, I want to talk. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Jared stood beside me, unsure. "Do we respond?" he asked. "She might be the last thread," I said. "And if she's willing to speak, or she could be bait." Einhev. We agreed to meet in a public place, an open cafe near the riverfront, cameras everywhere, people walking dogs and sipping lattes. Melanie arrived 10 minutes late, wearing sunglasses and a trench coat like a poor disguise. She looked smaller, not physically, but in presence. The fire she once used to cut me down at that party was gone. "I'm not proud of what I said that night," she began, sliding into the booth. "Or what I let happen after." I stayed silent. She said, "My father didn't just trick your son. He tricked me, told me Jared was using me for money, said if I wanted to inherit the business I needed to sever ties, that Jared was a liability." Jared leaned forward. "And you believed him." "I didn't want to. But I wanted his approval more than I realized." She pulled a flash drive from her purse. "These are the emails," she said. "Internal messages. My father directed payouts to city officials, and I can confirm he falsified inspection reports. I know because I signed off on 2. Jared reached for it, cautious. "Why now?" I asked. "Why turn against him?" She took off her sunglasses. "Because I see now who he is, and I see who I became under him, and if Jared can still stand after what we did, maybe it's not too late to do something right." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, truly." Jared nodded, tight-lipped. "We'll use the files," I said. "But forgiveness, that's a longer road." She nodded, eyes wet. When we left the cafe, I felt a shift, not forgiveness, not yet, but something lighter. Like the weight of silence was lifting, 1 ounce at a time. That night, Reggie published part 3 of the exposé, Bloodlines and Bottom Lines, the Ashford family fallout. It featured Melanie's confession, Griggs' deposition, Henry's research, a mosaic of pain and proof pieced together by courage. And it ended with this quote from me: "Justice isn't loud. Sometimes, it's just the refusal to stay quiet anymore." They came in waves, first a few dozen, then hundreds, then nearly 1,000. Old folks with hand-lettered signs, teenagers with bullhorns, mothers pushing strollers, families in matching T-shirts bearing names of neighborhoods lost, Vineville, Telfair Heights, East Pine. It started at the abandoned lot, where Ronald once promised a new community center. Nothing had been built, only a billboard, faded and cracked, still boasting a future that never came. From there, we marched through downtown, past City Hall, the courthouse, and finally to Ashford Plaza, the glass-walled building Ronald named after himself. Jared walked beside me, holding my hand like he used to when he was little and afraid of crowds. This time, though, he wasn't afraid. His head was high, voice steady as he chanted along with the others. "No more silence, no more lies." And quote, Reggie was there too, filming from the edges, documenting everything. He nodded at me as we passed. The march had been organized by housing activists and church leaders, but the fire behind it, the voice, was ours. What had started as a whisper between a mother and son had become something louder, bigger, undeniable. At Ashford Plaza, a makeshift stage had been set up. The organizers invited speakers to the mic. Jared spoke first. "My name is Jared Johnson," he began, "and I was used as a shield paraded around as proof of inclusion while Ronald Ashford destroyed the homes of people like me behind closed doors." His voice didn't shake. "My father-in-law called me a gold digger. What he didn't know was that the real wealth in this city wasn't in his accounts, it was in the people he tried to erase." Applause roared. Then they called my name. I stepped up, heart steady. The sky above was a perfect southern blue, cloudless and vast. "I'm not here as a politician," I said. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because for too long we've let people like Ronald Ashford decide whose lives matter and whose don't. But no more. Today, we speak. Today, we demand." I pulled out a list names of families evicted, displaced, ignored. These are not statistics. They are stories. And we're done being quiet. Chants erupted again. The plaza echoed with footsteps and fury and hope. Later that evening, news stations ran the story across the state. Headlines read, "Mass protest in Macon, demands justice in housing scandal. Ashford under siege. Public outcry grows. The mother who sparked a movement. But what mattered most wasn't the coverage. It was what happened the next morning. An emergency meeting was called by the state attorney general. Ronald Ashford's assets were officially frozen, pending investigation. Civil charges were being drafted. A grand jury was being convened. The tide had broken through. And for the first time in years, Macon felt like it belonged to its people again. That night, Jared and I sat on the porch, watching the neighbors put up Justice for Vinville signs on their lawns. "You proud of me?" he asked. I turned to him, brushing a curl from his forehead. "I've always been proud, even before all this." He smiled. "I think Henry would have marched with us." I nodded. He did, just in a different way. The stars blinked above us. Peaceful, present. The kind of night you remember, because it means something finally changed. The courthouse smelled of pine cleaner and old paper. Its walls had seen decades of justice served and justice delayed. On this morning, it waited for something different justice demanded. I arrived with Jared just before 9 a.m. The steps were crowded. Journalists, protesters, quiet families holding photos of old houses and eviction notices. Some nodded at me, silent acknowledgement. Others whispered, "That's her," like I'd become something bigger than myself. Inside, it was standing room only. Reporters lined the back, pens and cameras ready. Ronald sat at the defense table, surrounded by attorneys in expensive suits. He looked smaller somehow, his trademark smirk replaced by a clenched jaw and twitching fingers. The prosecution began with opening remarks, led by a young black woman named Alicia Monroe, sharp as a blade, voice calm and piercing. "This is not just about illegal contracts or financial misconduct," she said. "This is about human cost, about lives uprooted, communities dismantled, and dignity stolen under the guise of development. The defendant didn't just break the law, he broke trust." Jared reached for my hand. The evidence began to unfold over days. They brought in families, the Bennetts, Mrs. Washington, Miguel. Each testified, recounting fear, confusion, and loss. Their stories painted a mural of quiet suffering, made vivid under oath. Then came the experts economists explaining the shell corporations, digital forensics tracing the money trail, city auditors confessing how oversight was bypassed. Reggie testified too, confident, clear. "The truth didn't want to be hidden," he said. "It just needed someone to listen." In White's minds. And finally they played the deposition Nathan Griggs, voice clear in the courtroom. "I falsified reports. At Ronald's instruction, we made families disappear on paper before we made them disappear in real life." Ronald's team objected, of course, claimed bias, claimed political motives, claimed a media frenzy had tainted public opinion. But the facts kept speaking. Midway through the week, Melanie took the stand. She looked like herself again, less curated, more human. When asked why she came forward, she looked at Jared. "Because I remembered who I was before I let him tell me who I should be." Her testimony sealed the room in silence. Outside the courthouse, the community rallied. Food trucks parked nearby, churches brought water, local musicians played protest songs from the 60 Seconds. It wasn't a spectacle, it was solidarity. I didn't speak during the trial, not formally, but my presence was a statement. A mother, seated quietly in the front row, unmoving, unafraid. One afternoon during recess, Ronald passed by us in the hallway. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no hatred in mine, only recognition. He had underestimated the wrong family. By the end of the second week, the jury was visibly tired, but attentive. The prosecution rested their case with one photo, a vacant lot, once a neighborhood, now gravel and weeds. "This is what remains," Alicia said, "when power forgets its people." End quote. The defense began its case the next day, but the weight of truth was already tipping the scale. Ronald didn't take the stand. His lawyers knew better. The courtroom wasn't his boardroom, and the rules here weren't written by him. Instead, they called a string of character witnesses, former colleagues, a retired senator, a charity board member. They painted him as a visionary, a community builder, a man misunderstood by the media. Ask to dare. But none of them had walked the neighborhoods he gutted. None had read the eviction notices. None had held a crying child the day their family was told to leave with nowhere to go. The jury listened politely, but I could see the shift. They weren't buying redemption painted in money and white-collar polish. On the fourth day of the defense's case, something broke. One of Ronald's former assistants, a woman named Camille, was called to speak. She was supposed to be a safe witness, loyal, brief, scripted. Instead, she broke down on the stand. "I was told to shred files," she said, voice trembling. "Ronald told me it was just paperwork, but I saw the names, I saw the dates, I knew." The defense scrambled. Objections flew. The judge called for order, but it was too late. Camille sobbed into her hands. "I helped him bury people in paperwork. I thought I was just doing my job. I didn't realize I was helping erase lives." "It's a crossed mile." Silence filled the room like floodwater. The next morning, the judge announced the trial would proceed to closing arguments. Ronald's face was pale. His empire was no longer cracking, it was collapsing. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. What began as dozens had become hundreds, and now thousands. School teachers, union workers, grandmothers with lawn chairs, men in suits who whispered, "I lived on Clifton Road. They took our place in '07. 8 Dilder." Reggie's latest article ran that day, "The Fall of a False King." It chronicled the unraveling of Ronald's narrative. For every staged photo op, there was now a truth with a name, a face, and a voice. Jared and I walked through the crowd quietly. People nodded. Some touched my shoulder. A few cried. I wasn't famous. I was familiar. And then, Melanie appeared beside us. She had walked out of her father's sky-high tower and into the street, no entourage, no disguise. "I want to be here," she said. "I want to see the truth end where it began." In the courtroom, the prosecution gave its final remarks. Alicia Monroe's voice was soft, but her words struck like thunder. "This trial is not just about Ronald Ashford," she said. "It's about the lie that wealth excuses harm, that power rewrites morality, that if you smile for enough cameras, no one will check who you're stepping on." She pointed toward us. "And it's about people who refuse to be stepped on." "It's round." Jared squeezed my hand. That night, the city glowed not from fire or protest, but from porch lights. People stayed up, talked, remembered. They knew history was shifting, not by decree, but by demand. We went home, sat in silence. Jared finally said, "If he walks away from this." "He won't," I said, because even if the verdict said otherwise, the world already knew. Ronald Ashford had fallen. It rained that morning. A soft, steady downpour that blanketed Macon in silver mist, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Jared and I arrived at the courthouse under a shared umbrella. Our steps were slow, deliberate. Each crack in the sidewalk felt familiar now, like the town had aged with us through this fight. Inside, the crowd was thicker than ever. Reporters lined the hallway, cameras perched like birds waiting for a signal. Protest signs leaned against the walls. I recognized the faces now, not just neighbors, but allies, survivors. We were ushered to our usual seats in the front row. Melanie sat a few benches behind us, alone. Reggie nodded from the press section, pen poised. Then the bailiff spoke. "All rise. The jury has reached a verdict." The room stood as one. The jurors filed in, solemn and slow. 12 ordinary people who'd just spent 3 weeks with every lie Ronald had ever sold. I searched their faces. One woman clutched her purse like a Bible. A man near the end wiped his glasses twice before sitting. The judge asked the foreperson to stand. In the matter of the People versus Ronald Ashford on the charge of fraudulent real estate acquisition. A pause. "We find the defendant guilty." The word echoed. Jared exhaled so sharply it sounded like a sob. I felt his grip tighten in mine. But the foreperson wasn't done. "On the charge of unlawful eviction practices, guilty." "I few have our line." "On the charge of bribery and political interference, guilty." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, guilty." 4 counts, 4 verdicts. Ronald sat stone still, face unreadable. Not shocked, he had known. The moment Camille cracked on the stand, he knew. The moment Melanie handed over the flash drive, he knew. His lawyers looked deflated. One whispered something in his ear. He didn't respond. The judge banged the gavel. "Sentencing would come later," she said. The maximum combined term could exceed 25 years, not including pending civil suits. But today wasn't about numbers, it was about truth. Outside, the crowd erupted. Cheers, tears. Someone passed around coffee. People hugged strangers. An old man dropped to his knees and thanked God out loud. Reggie caught us on the courthouse steps. "We did it," he said, eyes red-rimmed. "You did it." "No," I corrected. "We told the truth. The jury gave it back to us." End quote. End quote. That night, there were vigils not of mourning, but remembrance. Candles lit in front yards. Photos of homes that had once been lost, now honored. Melanie texted Jared, "Thank you for letting the truth win." He didn't reply right away. We sat on the porch again. The rain had cleared, and the air smelled like something fresh, earthy, real. Jared leaned back in his chair. "Do you think this actually changes anything?" I looked out across the street. Lights on in every house. A boy riding his bike down the middle of the road like it was his again. "Yes," I said, "because now they know they're not invisible." He smiled. "Feels like Dad should be here." "He is," I said. "Every time we didn't quit. We stayed out until the stars blinked awake. Tomorrow would bring appeals, headlines, more work. But tonight, the city belonged to its people again." Spring came early that year. By March, the dogwoods bloomed in bursts of white and pink, and the air in Macon felt softer like a town exhaling after holding its breath too long. Jared and I stood at the edge of the old Vineville lot. We had brought folding chairs, thermoses of coffee, and a box of photographs. Around us, construction workers measured foundation lines. Kids chalked on the sidewalks. A wooden sign read, "Johnson Heights Affordable Housing, by the people, for the people." End quote. Jared had fought to name it after Dad. The council voted unanimously. It had been 3 months since the verdict. Ronald's sentencing made national headlines. 15 years without parole, plus restitution to every evicted family. His name was stripped from buildings. His photos taken down. No longer a legacy, just a warning. But we didn't come here today for him. We came because this land, once lost, was living again. I opened the photo box and pulled out an old one, our house on Cherry Street, long gone now. Jared as a boy, holding a toy dinosaur, Henry in the background with a half-built porch swing. "Do you remember how you cried when Dad painted the swing purple?" I asked. Jared laughed. "Because I thought purple was a girl color. He told me real men didn't fear colors." "He was right," I said. "About most things. It's Bress's bait." We sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee, watching hammers rise and fall like a heartbeat. Every board nailed down felt like a promise. A woman approached us young, holding a baby on her hip, a little boy clinging to her leg. "Excuse me," she said shyly. "Are you Mrs. Johnson?" I stood. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled wide. "We just got approved for Unit 3B. I just wanted to say thank you for fighting for this, for us." Jared knelt to greet the little boy. "You like dinosaurs?" The boy nodded hard. Jared reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a tiny green one, chipped, old, familiar. "My mom kept this in a box," he said. "Now it's yours." The boy's face lit up. When they left, I turned to Jared. Dad would have loved that. He would have loved all of this. By summer, the first families moved in. Reggie started a foundation for investigative journalism in small towns. Melanie testified in 2 more hearings and began working with a nonprofit on housing reform. She and Jared spoke occasionally cordial, not close. But something like understanding was forming. And me? I went back to work part-time at the clinic. Not because I needed to, but because listening to people, holding their hands while they spoke hard truths, still felt like a kind of justice. One evening, I found a letter in my mailbox, handwritten, no name. "You reminded us we have voices, and that silence is a choice. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson, for making noise when it mattered." I tucked it in the photo box. Now and then, I speak at schools, churches, libraries. I tell our story not as a victim's tale, but a witness's. Because sometimes justice doesn't come with sirens or confetti. Sometimes it's just a tired woman in a folding chair, watching a playground rise where silence once stood. And sometimes, that's enough. This story reminds us that justice isn't always loud. It often begins in silence, in overlooked places, with ordinary people who refuse to stay invisible. It teaches us that truth, when held onto with courage, can dismantle even the most polished lies. Above all, it's a testament to the quiet strength of mothers, the resilience of sons, and the power of community to reclaim what was stolen. In the end, real change comes not from power, but from persistence, compassion, and the unwavering belief that dignity belongs to everyone.